When is a vaccine not a vaccine? When it's a virus? This is about to get complicated. I'm Rachel Williamson, and this is Phase 3. There's a bit happening around cancer vaccines in Australia, from research through to biotechs testing ideas. But aside from BioNTech and Pfizer, and Moderna and Merck, which are working on mRNA cancer vaccines here, there are really only 2 local companies focused on this space and public about it yet: Imugene and ImmVirX. Both are working with oncolytic viruses. But Imugene CEO Leslie Chong says their DNA-based virus is not a vaccine. ImmVirX CEO Dr Malcolm McColl says their RNA version absolutely is. This opens the door for a great explainer, one that gets to the heart of where cancer vaccines sit within immunotherapy. Let's start at the start. Immunotherapies are a relatively new way to either turn up the volume on the immune system or clue it into the fact that a tumour exists. It is possible because of several major breakthroughs in the last 2 decades. One is the discovery of how to turn off checkpoint inhibitors, such as the PD-1 receptor on T cells. These keep the immune system in check. If you remove the check, you ramp up immune activity. Monoclonal antibodies or lab-made antibodies are one of the main therapies today, and then there is CAR T cell therapy. It's been super successful for blood cancers, but not so useful yet for solid cancer tumours. And at up to $500,000 per infusion in Australia, it is expensive. That's because it's autologous or uses a patient's own cells as opposed to an off-the-shelf or allogeneic option. You could say it's my bespoke green smoothie hangover cure to your Panadol. Into this mix are vaccines. They get the immune system to remember the cancer. Oncolytic viruses do this too, but for Imugene and their pox virus, which uses DNA for the hard work, it's not the remembering, but the killing they're into. CEO Leslie Chong says this is the key point of difference. You don't have a vaccine. You have an oncolytic virus.
Yeah.
So the virus itself does the killing.
Absolutely. It ruptures the cancer cells because it replicates, fills the cavity of the cancer cells with these white blood cells and immunity. It bursts. And then in addition to that, it draws your immunity to the site. So your immune system finally sees it because there's so much damage happening in that environment. So for instance, with our bile tract cancer patient, he took the drug for a period of months, so our virus, and then now he's cancer-free, but because his immune system is inactive. So his immune system is finally seeing the tumors and comes to rescue to the fight. So it's in this beautiful enabling your immune system to finally see the cancer by creating a situation where your cancer is bursting and infection happens and your immune system, the policing of your body comes to see what's going on and they realize there's some bad things going on, so they clear it.
Just to give our listeners an explainer, you're using the CF33 virus. It's a pox virus, like smallpox or mpox, and it inhabits the cytoplasm of the cell, which is the jelly outer bit, rather than the nucleus in the middle, which is where viruses normally colonize, and then it does its thing. So tell me about this virus and what you're using it for.
We're currently in a phase 1 study with the CF33, which stands for Dr. Chen, Dr. Fong, and it was the 33rd virus that they saw that had the most cancer killing power. And so we knew that it was pretty powerful. And we've already started seeing that in the clinic. We have one patient in particular, bile tract cancer patient, who has had a complete remission, no tumor growth, going on 2 years. And it's in a cancer type that normally nothing has really penetrated. So we're gleefully happy about that. And we have an expansion off that. We're really focused on one indication so that we can get the most amount of data so that we can move into that highly coveted phase 2 area. So we know it only replicates in cancer cells. There's something in the cytoplasm that's missing in a malignant or tumor cells.
So that's the naked oncolytic virus, so to speak. What might happen if you mix it with something else? After all, that's what the experts say is where the power lies for immunotherapies and vaccines in particular. Imugene is combining its virus with a CAR T therapy. That's the breakout blood cancer treatment. They reckon the virus might be a way to get CAR T to work for solid cancers. The idea is to cover a solid tumour in a protein only found in blood cancer, then whack it with the CAR T. They will find out soon enough whether the theory works. Imugene started a phase 1 clinical trial in California in July. Oncolytic viruses aren't a vaccine at Imugene. But when Leslie started with the company in 2015, its focus was protein-based cancer vaccines. Today, they're getting out of those. I asked Leslie what they're selling and why now, when the market appears to be heating up for cancer vaccines.
Our leading pipeline roughly about 5 years ago was what we called a B-cell peptide-based cancer vaccine. We had HER-Vaxxed, and that is still ongoing, but is primarily, we're looking to out-license that. And along with that, our PD-1 Vax, which is also a cancer vaccine, will likely fall into that category, B-cell peptide vaccine. So therefore, when we're looking to out-license HER-Vaxxed, there's a lot of conversations about including PD-1 as well.
Why are you out-licensing those now? Because you've been working on those for a very long time now.
Yeah, so we actively had been developing HER-Vaxxed for roughly about 4.5 years. And to get a positive phase 2 data on gastric in 4.5 years it's unheard of. However, the next level is that registrational phase 3, and that is going to be at an enormous cost, and it's really a huge burden on a small size company like ours. So the idea was to out-license those and then look to develop our oncolytic virus as well as our allogeneic CAR T product that we call Azer-cel.
You've been at Imugene since 2015.
Yes.
How has the investment climate for these products, these assets, changed in the time that you have been there?
So I think the investor environment for biotech or tech has completely changed in the last few years. I have to be an optimist and think that it's coming back. But earlier on, when we even had the HER-Vaxxed initial vaccine, it took years for people to finally understand what we're doing and then come in for the ride. So we had investments, largely retail at that time. So this is roughly about 9 years ago when I joined, and it was a $5 million market cap when I joined, and it kind of stagnated. It went up to 10, 30 for a number of years before it actually jumped to 100 million. It's when we made the acquisition of the oncolytic virus that we started to establish more of ourselves as a clinical developer in the cancer space.
Right now, the arena for cancer vaccines is starting to get really, really exciting, mostly because of mRNA, though not so much for DNA or peptide or protein-based vaccines that you guys are working with HER-Vaxxed and PDVax. Does that make this a good time to be licensing out that asset that you've been testing for such a long time?
I think with our B-cell platform, our HER-Vaxxed and PD-1 Vax, there are other products that those targets are so well served to the point where if we wanted to get back into the market, it would have to be a phase 3 study at a significant cost. mRNA, I think, is still in its infancy. And so until a product gets approved, then everyone will move towards it. So, I think it will excite the market to up to a point until it proves itself, but it may actually help us out license our product because of that excitement. We need all various different kind of arsenals against cancer. And if that's one way to show or a certain kind of cancer type is served, then I think all for it. And the better results that we get for various different mechanism of actions for cancer drug, the better the market will be, the more impressed the investors will come in, with that. So I'm all for innovation. I'm all for, moving ahead and looking at where the puck's going to be as opposed to just following along with the Me Too.
Yeah, and you think it's oncolytic viruses now? It's in that space, at least.
I definitely think that oncolytic virus is having a shine in the sun currently, with CG Therapeutics having some significant response rates in bladder that I've seen recently. I also think that the world needs an off-the-shelf allogeneic CAR T product, because autologous CAR T will help you to a certain point, but I think we need something off the shelf so that we're not reliant on so much of the personal T cells to do the job.
That was Imugene CEO Leslie Chong. She says their virus kills the cancer and recruits the immune system, but isn't a vaccine. Over at ImmVirX, their virus is different. It's an RNA virus. After the break, we'll find out why they swing the other way, towards the vaccine definition.
Hi there, I'm Charis Palmer, producer of Phase 3. When Rachel and I set about building a new podcast for life science leaders, scientists and long-suffering biotech investors, we looked at what was missing in this space. We believe Phase 3 serves an unmet need for in-depth conversations in a world where nuance matters and AI-written investment articles simply won't cut it. If you agree, please follow us and sign up to our newsletter via LinkedIn. Pledge financial support at phase3.buzzsprout.com and rate and review the podcast on the podcast platform you use to help bring it to the attention of others. Now back to the show.
ImmVirX may as well be the reincarnation of a company that was Australia's most successful biotech sale. Dr Malcolm McColl was the boss of Viralytics when Merck bought it for 500 million Australian dollars in 2018. It was doing RNA oncolytic viruses with a focus on melanoma. But Merck dumped the main asset, Cavitac, just 4 years after buying it, a casualty of being a little fish in a big pharma pipeline. And to be honest, oncolytic viruses have been stuck in early-stage research for a very long time. Only 3 companies are listed as currently running Phase 3 clinical trials in the US. There's oncolytic virus specialist Genelux, whose share price has halved since it listed last year. It is testing a pox virus, just like Imugene. Chinese biotech Binhui and US biotech Replimune are separately using a souped-up herpes virus for melanoma. And that's it. But Malcolm clearly believes in the concept. He got the old team back together to do a different RNA virus for some different brands of cancer.
So we're tackling some of the most globally prevalent cancer types, including colorectal cancer. Last time with Viralytics, we were targeting melanoma, which is sort of really far less common. So yeah, it's sort of a similar broad approach, but just a different virus. I think the fact we've moved so quickly just means that all the learnings from the previous company have been applied here. So I've been able to very rapidly take the program from just a whiteboard idea and now dosing patients, obviously. But this is genuinely just very straightforward to scale up and manufacture. And we've actually taken a lot of process steps here to make it even easier to transfer to big pharma, at that time when we're acquired or licensed.
You are referring to this as a cancer vaccine?
Well, it has vaccination effect. So it has sort of a dual mechanism of action, if you like. The oncolytic virus, IVX-037 is our lead candidate, has a direct ability to infect and then replicate or multiply within those cancer cells and then burst them. But in that whole process, it inflames the tumour. It's kind of a danger signal to the immune system. And when those cancer cells are sort of fractured, they release what's called neoantigens, which are very sort of unique to the cancer, unique in fact to that patient and to that tumour within the patient, but they can then be seen as foreign. And so then you get an immune response against these neoantigens, which really enables the virus to not only just kill the cancer where it's injected, but also drive an immune response against cancers around the rest of the body. So we saw this very clearly with virolytics, and I think we'll see the same outcome. In fact, I think we are already seeing signals with IVX-037. So it's a dual activity. The cancer killing effect also drives an immune response to cancer neoantigens.
Yeah, I ask you how you're referring to it simply because Imugene is doing something very, very similar with oncolytic viruses, but they don't like calling it a vaccine. And I think it highlights some of the confusion around what a cancer vaccine, a therapeutic cancer vaccine is and what it can do, and what is still a very, very emerging field.
Yeah, I think it's really very clear if you sort of, take the independent view and independent approach. Academics in the space very much think of this as, as I say, the cancer killing effect from the oncolytic virus, but also driving this broader immune response through exposure to the tumour neoantigens in this inflamed environment. As I said, that's what oncolytic viruses do very, very well. So, yeah, it's definitely a well-described process.
What is the virus that you're using?
We haven't actually disclosed that yet. We're sort of, as a private company, we're able to keep a fair bit up our sleeve. It's different to the virolytics Cavitac, but it's in the same broad family of small RNA viruses. The difference being that this small RNA virus targets the receptors that are overexpressed on colorectal, gastric, ovarian, hepatocellular carcinoma, whereas Cavitac really targeted the receptors that were overexpressed on melanoma. So that's why we had to move to a different virus targeting different receptors, because not all cancers are the same in terms of the receptor expression.
So are you saying that you've got almost a multi-cancer vaccine that you could roll out for these different...
Well, yes. Cancers that express that particular receptor are all great targets. Now, we've done preclinical work across the indications that I've described. Obviously, we're in the clinic and showing some really nice single-agent activity in colorectal cancer patients. And our second asset that is now moving through preclinical development will target receptors that are overexpressed, for example, on lung cancer. So that'll be our second asset moving into the clinic middle of next year.
So as you've said, your technology is looking at a whole range of cancers from colorectal, liver, lung, ovarian, gastric.
Yes.
Give us your elevator pitch on where the clinical trials are now.
Yeah, look, so we have completed first inpatient in April 2023, so 3 years from a whiteboard idea to get into the clinic, which is about a world record in terms of time, and also very low cost to do that, reflecting the qualities of the team. We've now completed dose escalation, where you start at a low dose and gradually increase the number of doses. So now we're just about to dose patients in the phase 1B study, which is where you combine the oncolytic virus with one of these anti-PD-1 inhibitors, so the checkpoints that are the most important drug in cancer therapy. And what we saw with virolytics was really excellent additive effect between the oncolytic virus and the checkpoint. So, we're kind of pretty optimistic about seeing that in this case. The checkpoint requires T cells to be in the tumour, and what the virus does is really inflame the tumour, drives those T cells in. The checkpoint takes the brakes off them, and therefore you do get this really nice additive effect. So we're pretty optimistic, actually, and I think we'll recruit the phase 1B across colorectal, gastric and ovarian in the first instance actually quite quickly.
Moving on to something a little bit different. You mentioned that
Yeah.
Big Pharma has a problem and that a range of drugs are coming off patent from 2025. Why is this relevant to cancer vaccines and to ImmVirX in particular?
Oh, well, it's just, I think the figure is something like, they lose about 300 billion in annual sales over the sort of next 5 years. And they, that's just unacceptable to their shareholders, to their board of directors, to their management, et cetera. So Big Pharma has a lot of money in the bank and will certainly be very active in terms of M&A activity over this sort of coming 5 years. I'm sure there'll be a lot of activity so they can kind of restock their pipelines and not have, massive loss of revenue. Merck is a perfect example of that. Have a wonderful drug called Keytruda with annual sales around 30 billion. That comes off patent. So they need to replace those revenues, and they have the cash to make acquisitions. They'll be looking for companies that have assets that are meaningful in terms of revenues, and certainly, an agent, an oncolytic virus that tackles the cancer types we've talked about would very, very definitely be in that basket.
This deal that you guys have done with a Chinese company, ImmVent, they're a $9 billion US company, 75 billion Hong Kong dollars. So I always wonder when someone like that does a deal with a startup, which is compared to them what you guys are, what the story is. Where did that come from? And what's the end goal? Because you guys, the Viralytics team, do have a track record in doing like an exceptional deal in this space.
Yeah, so sure. I mean, these guys are always just looking for, it's a bit like Merck, it's a bit like any of these big pharma companies. They're always looking for new assets to put into their pipeline, and they're an exceptional company. They've got a really strong sort of oncology portfolio and a pipeline as well. But one of the things they don't have is an oncolytic virus. And we've kind of known the folks at ImmVirX, in fact, the president and founder there for, going back to prior to COVID, and he'd always shown interest in us. ImmVirX don't have an oncolytic virus. They think ours has great prospects. So, who knows how that ends up down the track. And so whether we might do a carve out of Chinese territory, that's certainly possible in the future, as opposed to just doing a straight global deal. But these are important indications to ImmVirX, and also they like the technology.
And really interesting to see an Australian company doing a deal with someone in Asia, because it's not a common occurrence. Most people look to the US or to Europe. They very rarely look to those markets, Korea, Taiwan, China, Singapore even.
Well, yeah. No, exactly. And look, we've got a bit of a track record here too, because just before the Merck acquisition, we got investment from Lepu, who are a big player in China. They invested about 30 million in us. We didn't give them any rights, but they just like the technology. So you've got to look at the Chinese biopharma market, and it's just some of the technology coming out of there is remarkable, and it's going to really enhance the way we treat cancer in the next 20 or 30 years. So we're very delighted to have a relationship with ImmVirX, and I'm very happy to work with Chinese companies, both in Viralytics days and with ImmVirX. And obviously it still leaves you open to do the big global deal in the future as well. But no, we've been very happy to work with Chinese companies.
That was ImmVirX CEO, Dr Malcolm McColl. The mRNA wave has created a new fervour around cancer vaccines. But it's not the only pathway out there. Oncolytic viruses that can act like vaccines are in the mix too, depending on who you speak to and what their virus is. But this is where Australian companies are focusing, or at least the ones that are ready to publicly claim their spot in this sector. In our next episode, we ask two analysts for their take on these two companies, but also the wider cancer vaccine industry. Will it fizzle again? Or will mRNA provide the firepower it needs for investors to take another look?